7, an event you won't want to miss. So at this point, we've done a bunch of things with the drone. The drone makes it easier to build big, complex, and repeatable structures in Minecraft, but it was always possible to build those structures. It was just a lot of work. In this part, we're going to find out how to use the JavaScript we've learned to do things that simply aren't possible without modifying Minecraft. So let me introduce you to the Scriptcraft API reference. API stands for Application Programmer Interface, and it's basically the collection of functions, modules, and variables that Scriptcraft and Canary Mod provide to you so that you can do various things in Minecraft. So this is basically the sort of manual about what it provides. There's actually a lot of stuff here. There's a lot of detail, a lot of things that we haven't covered. We're going to cover some new things today. So one of the first things that we're going to look for is I'm going to search for items, and you can see there's an items module. Okay, and the items module provides a suite of function, one for each possible item, and then it leads to some documentation for Canary Mod. So we will try to make use of both of these things. So Canary Mod has its own documentation, but it's all relevant to what we can do here. So let's look back in Minecraft here. Let's get a hold of items. Same way we do it in our scripts. We say JS items equals require, in quotes, items. And so now we have access to the items module. So what can we do with that? Well, what we can do with that is we can say, right now I'm in survival mode. I don't have anything. Let's say I want, I'm in a flat world, which is kind of inconvenient. Let's say I wanted, well, what could I get? Can I get some wood? I can get wood doors. Actually, that's right. We know that we've seen before we can get blocks from just the blocks variable. The items gives us access to the items. So let's say I want a bow. How about that? Okay, so if I call items.bow as a function, so items is an object and it has a bunch of things on it, and as you see we can hit tab and we can see what those things are. If I run bow as a function, I get back this item type object. So this is an actual Canary Mod object, item type. Canary Mod has a lot of documentation that you can look up that tells you a bit more about the things you can do with an item type. But generally, the things that we're interested in doing with an item type are, well, probably creating items. So how would I get that bow? Well, one of the other things we can find, if we switch back to the documentation, and I go back to the front, the top of the documentation, there's a self variable. So self is you, the player. This is your own object. You can, as the warning here states, you only access this from within Minecraft at the command prompt. You don't do this in your modules. But if we look at self and we look at the things that are on here, wow, there's all kinds of things you can do to yourself, which is pretty cool. So definitely, when you have access to JavaScript, you can do all kinds of things. So one of the things on here is inventory. So if we look at our inventory, inventory itself is an object that has a bunch of other things that we can do. And if you look at that first thing, add item. So what do you bet that if we call that add item function with items.bow, what do you bet that's going to give us a bow? And that is exactly what it does. So now we have a bow. So here we are in survival mode, and we really have access to any item we might want. So getting any item we want in survival mode is something that we can't normally do, but it's also not that big a deal, right? Because it's kind of like creative mode then. Let's look at something that we couldn't do otherwise. So if I look at self.inventory, there are a couple other things I can do. you can see that I can remove items, and I can check to see there's a has item. But one of the other things I can do is I can see the item that I have in my hand. Okay, so the item that I have in my hand is a bow. It's not enchanted. It doesn't have lore. What is that lore thing? And what can I do with that? So let's see. I can make a variable called my bow. So basically, anytime you can get a hold of an object, like I could say stuff equals self.inventory. If I don't feel like typing self.inventory all the time, I can say stuff equals self.inventory, and that gives me access to that. So now I can say my bow equals stuff.item in hand, and so now I have my bow object, very convenient to access. And look, there are things I can do, like add enchantments and things like that. I'm going to try setting the lore to mine, all mine. Okay, how about that? In quotes, set lore mine, all mine. And now if I look in my inventory, the bow now says mine, all mine. Just like I said. What else could we change? How about display name to Kevin's bow? Yep, that works too. So now this is Kevin's bow. It's not just any old bow, it's my bow. So this gives you the idea that you can create kind of custom items. You might remember from the first part of this, I said we can't create new things, which means we can't, but with Scriptcraft and Canary Mod, we're changing the server side, which understands things about the world and the things that are in the world, but it doesn't deal with the display. So I can't change how the bow looks. I can't make something that's completely graphically different than what I've got. But you know what? In this part, we're going to look at ways that we can basically make a customized item. So we will make a customized bow. Okay, so I'm going to create a bow that causes arrows shot with that bow to explode. So I'm going to go into the Scriptcraft plugins directory, and I'm going to right click in there in brackets and select new file. And then in the new file, I will call it explodio.js. Okay. And we're going to need that items that we've been using here. So we've got items and requires not defined. So I will say global require. Okay, and so that error is gone. Okay, so I will need a bow. Now, one of the things we hadn't looked at yet is that basically you can, if you call items.bow without any arguments, what you get is the bow item type. Okay, so it's not actually a bow, it's just an object that represents all bows. Now, if I say bow 1, that will tell me to get one bow. I can actually make 5 bows if I want, but in this case, no, I want one bow. So that's fine. And what we're going to do here, let us switch over to our API reference, and let us search for recipes. So there's a recipes module. What we're going to do is we're going to make it so that, something kind of like this, we're going to make it so that we have a special bow, the bow of exploding, and to craft the bow of exploding, you need to use one bow and one TNT. Okay, so to do that, switching back to brackets, we're going to need TNT. So we get ourselves one of those. And then we also need to get a bow to represent the exploding bow. So I will say explode bow equals items.bow1. So we now have another bow. So the explode bow, we're going to customize that. You remember we were just setting the display name, so let's do that. Explode bow. We know it's an item and it has set display name on it because we did that in Minecraft. If you wanted to know what's available on item, you need to go look at the Canary mod documentation for the item. And Canary mod itself has lots of docs, and there are links from the Scriptcraft API documentation into Canary mod's documentation. But we're going to go and set display name to bow of exploding. Okay, and let us also give it a lore message. Just to let people know, what they can expect. Okay, so now looking back at the documentation for the recipes module, you can see that you call a recipes, well, first you bring in that module, recipes via require, then you say recipes.create, and you're passing in an object. We haven't really looked at this a whole lot in JavaScript to create an object that can basically, you might remember an object has names and values on it. So you use these curly braces, and we basically say result. So this object we're creating has a result on it, and the result of this particular one is the ender bow object. For us, it will be the explode bow. You can have ingredients, or you have to have ingredients. So you pass in an object for ingredients, and ingredients itself is an object. You can see it's got the curly braces. And what you do is you give a one-lettered abbreviation for each item that's going to be required in the recipe. So in this case, they're using items.enderpearl1 and items.stick. We're going to be using our bow and TNT. And then shape. Shape is an array. Remember, arrays are lists. So it's a list. And the first part of the list is a string with 3 letters. And that represents the top row of the crafting table's crafting for this item. And then, of course, the second row and the third row. So in this case, you have to do an ender pearl, a stick, and a string, and then stick, ender pearl, string, and ender pearl, stick, string again. So that's how you make an ender bow. We're going to do something simpler because our recipe is just taking a bow that you already have and giving it the TNT power. Okay, so let's see what that looks like. Explode bow recipe equals recipes.create. And remember, create an object with curly braces. And I'll put a semicolon there. And then result is explode bow. Ingredients is another object. So we will use B to represent the bow, and we will use T to represent TNT. So we already have variables for those. And then we'll give it a shape. Now for our shape, for this one, I'll put it on this line here. For our shape, we're going to have nothing on the first line. So I'll just do 3 spaces in quotes to show that first line is going to be blank. The second line just has a bow and TNT, and then I'll put a blank space. And then the third line is 3 spaces. Okay, so that'll be the shape. You have to put a bow and TNT in the middle left and middle of the crafting table. Okay, and then we will add that to the server. Server.add recipe. So this code that I'm typing in here is basically coming straight out of that documentation. So documentation is really handy here. Explode bow recipe. We pass that into the server object. So the server object, yes, of course, we haven't defined these things. Server is documented in the Scriptcraft API documentation as a global. So it's just given to us for free. So we put it in the globals. Recipes we have to bring in with a require statement. Recipes. Okay. Oops. There we go. If I save, no errors. So we should be able to craft a bow of exploding at this point. Why don't we go over to Minecraft and give it a try. So we refresh. Okay, so our plugin has reloaded. We have a bow already in hand. We need TNT. Of course, we can get TNT. Let's see, so items, I need that handy because I've restarted my server in the meantime. So I'm going to go and add TNT to my inventory. Self.inventory.add item items.tnt, and we only need one. So now I have a TNT. Oh, but you know what? I don't have a crafting table. So self.inventory.add item blocks.crafting table. Okay, so now I do have a crafting table. That was easy, wasn't it? Especially for a flat world where there are no trees. It's kind of nice to be able to get any item I need. Okay, so let's see. If I go into crafting and I put a bow, whoops, this one is still my customized bow, but it'll probably still be okay. Okay, so bow plus TNT equals a bow of exploding. And it's exactly as we defined it. And so now if I take that, we have crafted the bow of exploding. And I can hold that in my hand just like any other item. So that's pretty cool. Now you might be thinking, but wait, we didn't tell it how to explode. And that's exactly right. We'll need to do that. So let's go back to the Scriptcraft API documentation and see how we might find a way to make a bow or an arrow explode when it's shot with this bow. If we look at this documentation, there is a gigantic section for Events Helper, the Events Helper module. And there are all kinds of events. Now the way these events work, let us find the one that I am thinking of here. Scrolling down, look at all these events. And we will see how these work in just a moment. In fact, there are so many events, I can't even find the one I'm looking for. But I know it's here. All right, I'm just going to press Control F or Command F in my browser and search for projectile hit. That's the one. Okay, events.projectile hit. Callback, it says it takes a callback, which is a function which is called whenever the entity.projectile hit hook event is fired. Now if I click over here, I'm going to Command Tab to open that in a separate tab. This takes me to the Canary mod documentation. And basically what this means is that we're going to pass in a function. So you remember, a function is just a collection of statements. It's just something that is done. It's an action. It's something that the computer can do. And if we pass that into an event, when this event occurs, it will call that function whenever that event occurs. In this case, projectile hit. So let's see, when projectile hit gets called, it's going to pass in some information that tells you what entity was hit and what the projectile was. So let's take a look at how we can use this back in our code here. So we're going to need the events module that we saw referred to in the documentation here. Require events. Okay, and then going back to the bottom of the file, I'm going to basically say events.projectile hit. So it said to pass in a function, so I'll say on arrow hit. Okay, so now we have to define what on arrow hit actually is. On arrow hit. Now this is going to take an event object that has information about that event. So in the Canary mod documentation, we saw that there is a get projectile method that is basically on this event. So I'm going to say var projectile equals event.projectile. So this code can be pretty tricky to figure out because you can't really do a lot of testing on the Minecraft command line with this, because these events are called whenever the event happens. So you can't just type in a piece of code and see what it gives you, which is why the documentation becomes really important, because you need to know what's on there. One of the things I'll mention also is that I'm typing event.projectile. In the Canary Mod documentation, it said get projectile to get the projectile. So we don't, there's a shorthand actually. Whenever you see a get or a set, get something or set something, you can basically remove the get or set part and lowercase that first letter, and that is available to just type in directly. So event.projectile is this, so saying projectile equals event.projectile is the same thing as saying projectile equals event.getProjectile. Calling that as a method with actual parameters. So one of the things that we're going to need for this, I should also mention that some of this is coming from the arrows module. If you look in the Scriptcraft plugins, there's an arrows module. I made use of code in here because the code that you'll find elsewhere within Scriptcraft is really useful for figuring out how to do things. So that was exactly what I did. I looked in this module and it told me how to do things like what we're about to do. So the projectile object itself is an entity, and you can find out more about entities in the Canary Mod documentation. So I can say projectile.world. So we're going to need the world object, and we have access to the world object in Minecraft, so we can actually see what all is on there. You may remember that we actually manipulated the world a bit when we were setting whether or not it was raining with the rain command. So we're going to be using the world object for something else. We also need the location of the projectile. So we'll get that. And then we want to know who shot that projectile. So the thing to remember here is that when you're running Canary Mod and you're logged in with Minecraft, there could actually be multiple people on the server. So we need to look at the actual person who shot that arrow to know whether or not they were holding the bow of exploding. If they were holding the bow of exploding, then when they shot that arrow, only then will we make it explode. If it's somebody who was holding just a regular bow, we don't want that to explode. One of the other things we need to check is, was the projectile an arrow? Because really the projectile could be anything that is flying that happens to hit somebody. So anything that's flying that hits somebody, that counts as a projectile hit. We want to check for arrows in particular. So something else that I'll take basically straight out of that arrows module is this. So CM arrow, CM stands for Canary Mod, equals packages. Now this is a bit tricky what I'm doing here. Packages.net.canarymod.api.entity.arrow. Okay, what am I doing here? So what we're doing here is basically Scriptcraft gives us JavaScript as the programming language. And when we use Scriptcraft, when we use this packages object, what we're doing is we're reaching in to the Canary Mod Java code and the Canary Mod Java objects, and we're basically saying, give us this Java object that you'll find. It's Java modules, you could say, are broken down into packages, and basically there's a package called net canary mod API entity, and in there's an arrow object, and we want to get access to that arrow object. And the reason we want to get access to the Canary Mod arrow object is because we want to know, was that projectile an arrow? So this one, is a pretty new concept we're doing here, But basically, what I'm going to say is projectile, and I use this JavaScript keyword instance of CM arrow. So what we're saying here is this projectile object an instance of CM arrow? So CM arrow is a kind of object. You could say that those arrows are a kind of object, and we're checking to see, is that projectile one of those? So that's what we're doing here. And then, so we now know that we've got an arrow. If we do an if statement on that, we know, okay, we're holding an arrow. The next thing we need to know is the person holding the bow of exploding? Now, the way we can do that is something that we've already done in a way in Minecraft itself when we're playing around. So shooter is a player object, just like self. Okay, just like self, when we typed in self.inventory, we can say shooter.inventory item in hand. Remember, we were able to see what we were holding on to just by saying item in hand, and so that's what we do here. Get display name, and we know what that should be because we actually set the display name. We know we set it to bow of exploding, and so if we get the display name and it equals bow of exploding, then we know that the person who shot that arrow is holding the bow of exploding. And so when that's the case, we want to make the arrow explode. Now, this is one thing again that I took straight out of the arrows module is projectile.destroy. So if you think about it, the arrow in this process, the arrow itself, is going to go away. So we need to tell Canary Mod to do that. The other thing we want to do is we want to tell the world to make an explosion. So the world itself will cause an explosion to happen. Okay, the shooter is the player who caused the explosion. The location is the location of the projectile. I'll make up a variable for explosive yield. And then I'm not sure what this last true is for. If we go into the Canary Mod documentation for world, I'm sure we can actually find out what all the make explosion takes. I'm going to make explosive yield a variable though, just so we can tweak it if we want to. So I'll use 2.5, which is what what Scriptcraft came with. One thing I'll note also, just in conventions in JavaScript, you tend to use all uppercase for what we call constants, which is just a variable. It's just a value that we want to be able to represent in English, rather than having this magic number 2.5 over here. We want to know what that 2.5 is supposed to mean. It means the explosive yield, so it's a bit more readable, a bit easier to change. But you tend to make them all uppercase. Okay, so I'll save that. Oh, and we haven't defined packages, which is a global. So I add it to the globals here. Okay, our errors are gone. And so now we should have it so that when we shoot an arrow and holding the bow of exploding, we will get an explosion. Let us go to Minecraft and try it out. I'm going to refresh. Okay, so I'm holding a bow of exploding. I have no arrows. And I'd like to try a regular bow first, just to make sure everything is working normally. So I'm going to say self inventory add item, items.bow. Oops. Oh, okay, I don't have items available. Okay, so now I have a normal bow and a bow of exploding. And then I want to give myself some arrows. So self inventory add item, items.arrow, and I'll give myself 10. So now I have 10 arrows, just like that. That was easy. Okay, and you know what? We don't really have anything to explode, so that's not much fun. Let's do something about that. So let's give ourselves a hotel that we can kind of blow up a bit. So here comes the hotel. Up it goes. Such a nice hotel to want to explode it, but That's okay. Now we see, if I were to shoot an arrow now, I'm holding the regular bow. So let's try it. If I shoot an arrow now, the arrow sticks into the hotel just like normal. Behaves just like a normal arrow, so that's not quite so interesting, but it's exactly what we'd expect. Now the big trick is, if I'm using the bow of exploding, what's going to happen? We get a big boom, and that really worked. So yes, the hotel is nice and airy now because it has no doors anymore. Pretty cool. And there's one more thing I want to do to make this a bit more interesting. Let's make it so that we also have a second bow that is even more powerful. We'll call it the nuclear bow. Nuclear bow. So you'll see we should be able to pretty much just repeat what we did. The nuclear yield will be much bigger. 10. Okay. And so we can pretty much just repeat what we've done here. Copied and pasted. And I will say nuclear bow, set display name to nuclear bow. And set the lore on that. Okay, so now we need to make sure we change everything. So nuclear bow recipe, the result is a nuclear bow. And for this one, the difference will be that you need two, whoops, this is the wrong place for that. You need two TNTs. So to do that, all we have to do is add a second TNT there. Actually, wait, why don't we make it so that it's TNT, bow, TNT. Okay, and then we add the nuclear bow recipe. Okay, so how does this change our on arrow hit function? So we're checking to see, do we have an arrow? That's good. Then we check to see, is the display name bow of exploding? So what we need to do is we'll say else, because we're going to try another case here. If shooter.inventory.item in hand .get display name is nuclear bow. And of course, if you spell any of these things wrong, it's not going to work. Then we do projectile.destroy, and then world.make explosion shooter loc nuclear yield true. Now, one of the things I will mention also about this is when you're changing event handlers, you might sometimes want to restart Canary Mod or tell it to reload the plugins because refresh may or may not always pick up what your changes are. But let's give it a try and see if we can get our changes in here. JS refresh. All right, and we go back to our crafting table. But we're going to need, hold on, before we do that, we're going to need some TNT. Self-inventory add items dot TNT. Oh wait, I think because we refreshed, we might have what we need. Items. Do I have items? I don't. Okay. Items equals require items. Okay, self inventory add item items.tnt, comma 2, because we need 2 TNTs to do this. Okay, so now we can go in here and craft one there, and we take our bow. Oh, okay, and see, it didn't work. We didn't actually get what we want. So I am going to restart my Canary mod. So sometimes the best thing to do when you run into a problem and you don't know what's causing it is to step away for a bit, come back and look at the problem with fresh eyes. And that's what I did. And I noticed that this bow that I was trying to use to craft the nuclear bow, this one here, is partly used. And I don't know why this is the case, but for some reason using a partly used bow for crafting doesn't work. You have to take a fresh bow. So I have a fresh bow here, and I'll place the TNT, and now you can see that I can indeed craft a nuclear bow. I'll put that in my hotbar here, and let us give this a try. Why don't we stand back for the full effect? And aim and fire. And that is a very big boom indeed. And you can see this being a flat world, we went all the way down to bedrock and took off a good portion of that hotel. So anyway, this was a quick look at creating new items. There's a lot more you can do with this. There's a ton of events. You definitely want to check out the documentation, see what you can do.